Hello, everyone, and welcome to this workshop on critical evaluation skills today. Thanks for joining me. My name is Kieran. I am one of your English support tutors on the Manchester campus, and yeah, it's lovely to have you here. So, um, so we're looking at critical evaluation skills, and we're going to cover a lot of different things today. So, hopefully, you have some pen and paper near to you, so you can make some notes and write down some ideas. So, without further ado, let's get started. So first of all, we've got some self-reflective questions to get your brain moving. Okay. So um, maybe you've had a look at some assignments so far, and maybe your assignments have been described as too descriptive. Has that ever happened to you? Um, so if that has happened to you, maybe that suggests a little problem with critical evaluation skills. It may also be that you've heard that you need to show more critical analysis. Okay, has that ever happened to you as well? So have a little think about that. Maybe take a little minute, have a think about it, and then we'll come back and continue. Okay, so if you have ever encountered those two problems, then there are things that we can do to improve. Okay, so improving your critical evaluation skills will really help you when it comes to these two situations. Okay, so these are skills that will help you throughout your time here on the course and then for your whole life afterwards. Okay, so they are super important. So we're going to figure out why in the basically across this workshop. Okay, so what is critical thinking? Maybe you've heard of this phrase before. Okay, so can anybody give me a definition? Oh, all right, so if you're not sure, maybe you can pause the video now, take a little look at a search engine that could help you, and then come back and see if that matches the answer we have on screen. Okay, so what did you find out? What definitions did you have? Okay, I'm sure you got some great answers, but I mean there are lots of different definitions of it, but we're going to look at one specific one um, from our friends T. Burns and S. Infield, who are at the University of Edinburgh. Okay, so they had their ideas about what critical thinking is. So let's have a look at it on the screen then. Okay, so critical thinking is the art of making clear, reasoned judgments based on interpreting, understanding, applying, and synthesizing evidence gathered from observation, reading, and experimentation. So that is a super long explanation, but it is also very clear and precise. Okay, so let's break it down a little bit. So first of all, it is making clear judgments. Okay, so your ideas have to be clear. Connected to this is that they need to be reasoned judgments. So you need to have ideas which are explained. Okay, but it's a little bit more than that. It's not just clear and explained ideas. They need to be based on something. So they are based on interpreting evidence. Okay, so this could be looking at data or looking at other people's research, but it's not just looking at it, it is interpreting it. Okay, and it is a bit more than interpreting because it also needs to be that you understand what that data tells you. Okay. But that's only the second step. The third step is applying that evidence. Okay, so you need to apply it to a certain situation or to the current ideas that are moving in that kind of field. Okay, and then also we've got synthesizing. So that would be taking more than one source of information and then combining it together and talking about the advantages, disadvantages, weighing up the information. Okay. But it even goes further than that because it can be from observation, it can be from reading, which is probably your main source, and then through experimentation as well. Okay, so it sounds very complicated, but in general, in a basic form, it is quite simple. Okay, it is looking at your sources and thinking about them in a very critical way. Okay, so let's think about how this connects to your course then. So this means that you don't just accept information or circumstances as it is. You need to think about how the circumstances affect the data or affect the research. Okay. So the next important thing is that your main aim should be understanding any reasons that could be behind that research or behind that viewpoint. Okay. And beyond that, you need to be thinking about other things, so alternative possibilities, and then also any recommendations or things that come from that research. Okay, so it's not just talking about what other academics think, it is then taking that information, thinking about what context they are coming from, and then what are the results that come from that research. Okay, so let's have a look at our next part here. So this is going to be a chance for you to do a little exercise here. Okay, so you'll say that it says work with a partner. If you've got a partner, that's cool. You can do it with them. If you don't have a partner, you can do it on your own. It's as easy as that, really. Okay, so we've got an everyday example here, which hopefully will show your critical skills. Okay, so let's look at it in a bit more information. So it says, you have been offered a job. Congratulations, well done. Not everybody is that lucky. And it says you are considering where to live. Okay, a common problem for people around the world. And it tells us that you have identified the following four options as options that are within your budget. So we have the four options, but all of these four options have their advantages and their disadvantages. Okay, so you've got your property types across the top, and then you have your issues here on the left. Okay, so what you're going to do is have a look at this table, and then working with your partner or working on your own, you're going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each of those four properties, and then decide which one is best. So remember, there is no correct answer here. It is only based on what your idea is and if you can justify your opinion. Okay, so what I suggest you do here is pause the video, discuss with your partner or have a look for yourself, and then come back in a few minutes and be ready to justify your answer. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. Now, hopefully you've chosen one and hopefully you have your reasons for it. So it may be that you look at the monthly cost. Yeah, so normally the damage to our wallet often affects how we make our choices. So it could be that you think the first one is the best option because it has the lowest monthly cost and it has a very low cost of living. Those are our advantages. But then we understand that the distance from work is quite big and the distance from public transport is quite big. So it has some advantages, but also some disadvantages as well. The second one has some similar problems. It is closer to public transport, but it costs more. Okay. Now the third one is closer. Okay, half-hour bike ride, 15-minute walk. Okay, so that's cool. You're super close to work and things like that, but the monthly cost is more. So that is balanced out, the advantages and disadvantages. And maybe you think the last one is cool because it is much, much closer to work. However, it is a rental and it is more expensive. So, like we said, there is no correct answer here. It is just based on your own opinion and you being able to justify it. However, it doesn't really matter what your answer is as long as you can justify it. So, in that activity, hopefully you were using some critical thinking skills. So, these could include identifying criteria. Okay. All right. So, it would be you deciding what are the most important factors. All right. And then connected to that is identifying critical questions to guide your decision making. Okay. So when you're asking those questions to yourself, that is a sign that you're using your critical thinking skills. All right. You're also identifying problems to be solved. Okay. And then another critical thinking skill is gathering relevant, reliable information. So you saw that there was a lot of information there, but not all of it was necessarily relevant. So highlighting and finding that reliable, relevant information was an important skill. Okay. And basically, this was the whole task then. You were comparing options and you were evaluating those options based on your own criteria. So all of those skills that you are using there are skills that will be useful and that you will definitely use throughout your course. Okay. All right. So whether you're writing an assignment or making a presentation or things like that, you will be using all of these skills that we've looked at. Okay. So if you're going to write an assignment on a certain topic, you should be thinking about all of those things. Okay. All right. So you might want to take a screenshot or make a little note of all of those things you should be doing. Okay. I wish I'd been told these when I was at university because I think that's a super useful list of the skills we need to have. Okay. So hopefully you've done that now. So that means we can move on to our next section. Okay. So let's think about how we can actually put those skills into practice. So the first thing is going to be when we are actually reading ourselves, researching, preparing for our assignments. So this is when we come to the hilariously named CRAAP test. Okay. So it does have an interesting name, and then hopefully that will help you to remember the certain skills that we should be following in the future. Okay. So what can happen is that when you're reading, you're only looking for a specific information so you can put it in your assignment. Now that's okay, but you should be doing much, much more rather than just find it, write it in your assignment. There should be at least 5 different steps that you should go through. Okay, so the main thing you need to think about is your text suitable? Is it credible? Because if it isn't credible, you shouldn't include it in your assignment. Okay, so you can use the CRAAP test to make sure that you really are looking at it critically. Okay, so the C in CRAAP talks about currency. Now, that's not talking about money, currency. This is talking about how current it is. So ideally, it should be within the last 5 years, or even sooner. But if not, that's okay. But there are still some things you should think about. So first of all, when it was published, and is the idea or the issue that it is discussing current? And it may be that if it was published a little while ago, that the idea or the article has been revised. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so connected to that is the idea of R, the R for relevance. Okay, so is the thing that you're reading, is it actually relevant to what you're writing about? It might be that it is in the same field, but it might be that it's in your field, but it is not actually connected to the issue you're writing about. Okay. So are you including it because it's in the field, or are you including it because it is actually specifically relevant to your assignment, etc.? Okay, so think about, will it actually help you by including it? Okay. And then the other thing, like, who was it actually written for? Okay. Was it written for an academic audience or not? And then is it actually appropriate for what you're writing about? Okay. So very good questions for you to think about there. So let's look at our first A. Okay. So A is talking about authority. Okay, so is the person who has written the source an expert in their field? If they're not, it casts some doubts. Maybe it gives you some suspicions about what they've actually written. Okay, so who is the author? Are you able to find more information about the author online? If not, you should be a little bit suspicious. Okay, are they an expert in their field? Okay, do they have a master's, a doctorate? Are they a professor somewhere? Okay. And connected to that, are they actually qualified to talk about the field that you're reading about? So, some good questions for you to think about there as well. So, let's move on to the next A. Okay. So, the next A discusses accuracy. Okay. So, this might be difficult for you to do based on your kind of limited knowledge of the topic. So, first of all, based on just what you can feel, does it feel like it is truthful? Is it accurate? And the reason, possibly the best way for you to discover this is by thinking, is it backed up with evidence? Okay, so if they are quoting something in their book, you need to think about, is it actually backed up with any kind of research or data? Another thing to think about then is, has it been peer reviewed? So in most academic journals, they should be peer reviewed. That means that it has been looked at by another academic who has confirmed the results of the article. Okay. Right, so that leads us on to our last part of the CRAAP test, which is the P. So this is the purpose. So you need to think at this point, why has the author written what they have written? Have they written it because they've been paid to write it by some commercial entity? Is it because somebody has asked them to do it to show some kind of bias or some kind of connection to the data? Okay. So that is one thing you need to think about. It can often be hidden or it can often be kind of secretive, but when you're reading it, does it feel like this person has been swayed to write in a particular way? Okay. So those are the 5 different criteria we should think about when we are reading. Okay. So, like I said before, maybe take a screenshot, maybe make a note of this list, because these questions will be super useful for you in the future. Okay. So that's what you're doing while you're reading. Then when it comes to your writing, you will need to include at least 3 different skills, okay? Because you're not just going to say, this person said this thing. You need to take a few more different steps to make sure that your assignment really is looking at those texts in a critical way. So the 3 different things you need to think about, you need to think, are you analyzing? Okay, so how do the texts that you mention, how do they fit together and how do they relate to each other? This then helpfully links to the next question, which is about comparison. Okay, in what ways are the texts different and in what ways are they the same? Okay, and then lastly, think about how the text that you mentioned fit into your larger argument. Do they agree with the idea that you're trying to describe, or do they disagree? It's completely fine. If it's disagree, just you still need to include it. Okay, so those 3 skills will really set you up for your assignment. So let's think about then what you do while you're writing your assignment. Okay. So this is where we get into the really difficult parts. Okay, so we will look at how um, some simple textual analysis has been done, and then we'll think about how we can take it to a much more difficult, complicated, but better kind of analysis. Okay, so look at this part at the top because this is very important for you. It is not enough to just state what happened. You need to identify its significance. Okay, so you have said that something has happened, but you need to explain why that is important. Okay, so we've got an example here of something that is descriptive, but we don't want to be descriptive. We want to go a step further. Okay, so the data shows that the incidence of asthma rates in children under 15 years old increased rapidly from 1977, peaking in 1993 and then declining, though rates still remain significantly higher than pre-1976 levels. Now that seems like it's okay, but it is missing something. It needs to be critical. Okay, so let's have a look at the critical example, the thing that we should be trying to do. Okay, because we need to say why it is significant. Okay, the trend from 1977 until 1993 of a rapid rise in rates of asthma diagnosis in children under 15 years suggests that one of the causal factors was particularly prevalent during this time, but has since declined in importance or effect. Okay, so that text has gone a step further and actually had a look at that data critically. Okay, so so now in a similar vein, but also quite different as well, it is not enough to just explain the theory that you're including. You need to explain why that theory is relevant. Okay, so it's okay mentioning the person and the theory, but you need to say how that connects to your topic. So let's look at our descriptive example. So Carl Rogers' theory of a person-centered approach focuses on the freedom of the individual to determine what values should be used to measure successful personal outcomes or benefit, and is particularly relevant for social workers when wanting to take into account the diverse needs of the client group. Okay, so that seems like it is okay, but we can take it to a whole new level by adding in some critical analysis. So we've got the same thing here, but it explains why. Okay, because it allows the client to determine what values should be used. Okay, so we're not just explaining the theory, but how it connects to what we're discussing. Okay. And something similar can be seen in this third section here. So it is not enough to note the method that has been used, but you need to also show how appropriate it was. Okay, so our descriptive example is, in addition to competency-based questions, the candidates were asked to complete an in-tray exercise, which required them to allocate different priority levels to tasks as an appropriate method to measure their likely performance in the actual job. But let's have a look at how it comes out in the critical analysis. Okay, so we've got, in addition to competency-based questions, candidates were asked to complete an in-tray task prioritization exercise. This was because it was considered a more effective way to measure likely performance. Okay, so we're not just discussing what the method was, but how it is appropriate to the situation. So hopefully those three examples have shown you that you don't just take something on face value, you also always need to have that question of why? Why was this done? Why does this idea connect to our topic? Right, so we're going to have a look at another exercise that you can do either on your own or with a partner. Okay, so let's have a look at the activity that we need to carry out here. So here we've got Article 1 and Article 2, and listed are the main points from those articles about the employment of young people. So, two different articles, and the articles have two different lists of points that should be connected to the article. Okay, so there they are on the screen. We will look at them in a second. And here we have a sample sentence. Okay, so this is an example of how we can synthesize the ideas from both of the articles. So I don't know if you want to pause this now and go back to the video much earlier on where we talked about synthesis. This is about combining ideas together in your assignment in order to show your understanding of the two sources. So here we've got a sentence that does synthesize those ideas. Okay. So if you read that one, and if you read that one, you will understand that economic and social factors which affect career opportunities for young people have worsened since the COVID pandemic. Two recent articles highlight the increase in employers' use of unpaid internships. Okay. So if you check, you will see that both the articles mention this thing. Okay. So by taking the first one and by taking the second one, you can see the similarities between the texts. Okay. And you will notice there that this sentence also references those two texts as well. Okay. So you notice it is always important to reference the texts that you use. So let's think about the activity you need to do. So based on those two texts, those two articles, you need to make some notes in this table here. Okay, so this is where you need your pen and paper. So you will need to notice and find out some points that are made by both articles. So the similarities between the two articles. And then you also need to note down some differences between the two articles. Okay, they may have some ideas which are contrary to each other. So it is interesting to find them too. So what you're doing here is practicing your critical skills of finding similarities and differences. So pause the video now, read the points, and then try to make your notes. You will notice there are already some points that have been made here, so try to think of some other ones as well. Okay, so if you're on pause now, hopefully you came up with a whole list of things there. Okay, so I'm sure you had lots and lots of good ideas. Okay, so what you should have noticed that there are quite a few similarities, but also quite a few differences as well. Okay, all right, so as always, we should include a link to our references whenever we're doing anything on our course here. So these are all of the sources that I used in this PowerPoint, and you should try and get into the habit of doing that as well. Okay, so that is the end of our presentation on critical evaluation skills. If you think you need any more help with this, then please do get in touch with us at the English support department. You can contact us by email and you can also visit us in person. Now, generally, if you want to contact us by email, you can contact us at, oh, you might need a pen and paper to write this down. You can contact us on English support underscore Manchester WH at esl.ac.uk. Okay, quite an easy one to remember there. And we can help you in many different ways. So We could help you with assignment writing skills to make sure that your assignments are up to the required level. So we can have a look at sections and check the grammar and spelling and the language that you're using to make sure it's at the highest level for you to get a good grade. We can also help you with your presentation skills. So if you are shy or nervous about presenting, then if you come to us, we will help you to, well, first of all, we can look at your script for your presentation, but we can also help you with the skills you really need to perform well in front of a room of lots of people. We can also help you with other academic skills as well, listening, reading, note taking, things like that. So we are available in person, so sometimes we can arrange a meeting in the library. Or if you find yourself off campus, then you can have a one-to-one meeting with us on Microsoft Teams. So if you contact us through the email that we discussed, then we can arrange a meeting and help you with those things. Okay. So thank you very much for your time and attention today, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.